He was 72 years old when they called him trash. In front of 100 people, in front of the cameras, his old Hispano Suiza gleamed under the sun. But for them, it was just a museum relic. The director challenged him to a race. A yellow Ferrari against 93 years of history. Everyone expected to see him lose. Everyone expected to see him humiliated. But then, something changed. It wasn't the speed. It was the dignity of a man who never forgot who he was. Give this a like. If you've ever been treated like you were worth nothing, but you kept standing tall, it's not just a click, it's a silent embrace among those who know what dignity is. Comment on how you think this story is going to end. And if you haven't subscribed yet, it costs you nothing, but for us it means a lot. Thank you for being here. The golden light of San Diego was spilling onto the still empty streets when Marcus Sterling turned the wheel of his 1932 Hispano Suiza toward the entrance of Solaris Tech. The engine purred with the smoothness of decades of meticulous care, a sound that contrasted with the early morning silence. Marcus had arrived before anyone else, as always. At 72 years old, punctuality was more than a habit. It was a form of respect. His hands, calloused by years of work, caressed the polished wooden steering wheel as he observed the glass and steel building that housed one of California's most promising tech companies. The Hispano Suiza shone under the morning sun. Every inch of its black body had been polished with devotion. The chrome sparkled like mirrors, and the impeccable spoked wheels displayed the silent pride of its owner. It wasn't just a car, it was a testament to patience, to a love for the durable, to a respect for history. Marcus parked in the space closest to the main entrance. He didn't do it for convenience, but because it was the only one available at that hour. He got out with slow but sure movements, smoothed down his blue janitor's uniform, and adjusted the cap he'd worn for 15 years. A serene, almost contemplative expression was etched on his wrinkled face. He walked toward the service entrance, carrying the canvas bag where he kept his coffee thermos and the sandwich his wife Clara had prepared before dawn. The building was still asleep. The wide, minimalist hallways silently awaited the arrival of the hundreds of employees who would soon fill it with voices, keystrokes, and ambitions. Marcus began his routine, turning on the lights in the main offices, checking that the conference rooms were spotless, inspecting the restrooms, tidying the common areas. He performed every task with the same attention he devoted to his car. No job was too small for someone who did it with dignity. An hour later, the parking lot began to fill up. BMWs, Audis, Mercedes-Benzes, and the occasional Tesla lined up in neat rows. Employees arrived with their to-go coffees, their custom-tailored suits, and their conversations about cryptocurrencies and market valuations. No one noticed Marcus as he discreetly swept the main entrance. He was invisible, as are those who keep the world running without asking for recognition. Then, at 9 sharp, the unmistakable roar of a sports car was heard. Brendan Miller's yellow Ferrari 488 GTB entered the parking lot like a bolt of arrogance. The CEO of Solaris Tech drove with one hand while checking his mobile with the other, surrounded by a cloud of expensive cologne and conceit. Brendan was 42 years old, with slicked back hair, an Italian suit that cost more than 3 months of Marcus's salary, and a perpetual expression of superiority. He had risen rapidly in the company thanks to family connections, brilliant presentations, and a remarkable ability to take credit for others' successes. When he approached his reserved spot, the one closest to the entrance with his name in gold letters, he braked abruptly. There, occupying his sacred space, was Marcus's Hispano Suiza. Brendan's face instantly turned red. He honked insistently, a jarring sound that made several employees turn around. Some pulled out their phones, sensing that something interesting was about to happen. Brendan got out of the Ferrari, slamming the door. His Italian leather shoes echoed against the pavement as he headed toward the entrance, where Marcus was collecting some dry leaves. "Hey, you!" Brendan shouted, pointing his finger. "Who gave you permission to park?" That clunker in my spot." Marcus looked up calmly. His grey eyes, quiet as a winter lake, met the director's furious gaze. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," he replied in a serene voice. "I arrived early, and it was the only space available. As soon as I finish cleaning the entrance, I will move the car." "Finish cleaning?" Brendan let out a dry laugh. "And I'm supposed to wait for a janitor to finish sweeping while my Ferrari is sitting there like an idiot?" More employees had stopped now, forming a casual but attentive semicircle. Mobile cameras captured every word, every gesture. "It will only be a moment, sir," Marcus said, returning to his work with the same tranquility. Brendan felt his blood boil. It wasn't just the badly parked car. It was the indifference, the lack of submission, the way this old man dared not to acknowledge his superiority, and all in front of people. "Move. That car now." The words came out through gritted teeth. Marcus straightened up slowly, leaning on the broom. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves he had just gathered. "I will move it when I can do so safely, Mr. Miller. My hands are occupied at the moment." Several employees stifled laughs. Brendan felt it like a slap. His reputation, his image as a ruthless leader, was being undermined by a 72-year-old janitor in front of an audience that was growing by the second. He needed to regain control. He needed a master stroke. Then, with the impulsiveness of someone accustomed to getting his way, Brendan pointed at the Hispano-Suiza and said the words that would change everything. "You know what? That rattletrap of yours looks like a museum piece. It probably doesn't even run properly." His voice rose in volume, ensuring everyone could hear. "I propose something, a race. Your car against mine, right here on the internal circuit of the parking lot." A murmur ran through the crowd. Brendan continued, with a smile that was meant to be magnanimous but only showed cruelty. "If your relic wins, I give you Solaris Tech, the entire company. If I lose, which is impossible, I'll resign and leave. But when my Ferrari wins, you publicly acknowledge that I am superior. And you find another job." The silence that followed was absolute. All eyes turned to Marcus, expecting him to refuse, to apologize, to back down, as was appropriate for someone in his position. But Marcus simply took off his cap, held it carefully between his hands, and looked Brendan directly in the eye. "I accept," he said in a voice so calm that he seemed to be accepting a cup of tea. The news spread through Solaris Tech like an electric current. In less than 5 minutes, almost 100 people had gathered in the parking lot. Employees from all departments left their desks. Some even called colleagues from other floors to come down and witness the spectacle. Marcus walked toward his Hispano-Suiza with measured steps. There was no hurry in his movements, no sign of nervousness. He opened. The door, with the same reverence with which others would open a sacred book, settled into the restored leather seat and adjusted the rearview mirror. Brendan, meanwhile, had taken off his jacket and tossed it carelessly over the hood of his Ferrari. He rolled up the sleeves of his white shirt to his elbows, showing a Swiss watch that cost as much as a mid-range car. He smiled with the confidence of someone who already knows the outcome. "Robert, mark the course," he ordered his personal assistant, a 26-year-old man who always carried a tablet under his arm. Robert, nervous about the situation but unable to disobey, pointed out the circuit, from the parking lot entrance, circling the building on the internal service road, and returning to the starting point. Approximately a mile of slightly undulating asphalt with 2 tight curves. "The rules are simple," Brendan announced, raising his voice so everyone could hear. "First one to cross the start line on the return lap wins. No tricks, no shortcuts, pure speed." Several people applauded. Others exchanged informal bets, although no one was betting on Marcus. It was a foregone conclusion. A 500-horsepower Ferrari against a car nearly a century old. Eve Thornton, president of the Solaris Tech Board, had arrived just in time to witness the start of the chaos. She was a 58-year-old woman, with grey hair cut in an elegant bob and a presence that commanded respect without needing to raise her voice. She wore a graphite-colored business suit and thin-rimmed glasses that gave her an intellectual air. She made her way through the crowd until she reached Robert. "What is going on here?" she asked, although she already sensed the answer. "Mr. Miller challenged the janitor to a race, Ms. Thornton," Robert explained in a low voice. "He bet the company." Eve closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. She knew Brendan's impulsive temper well, his constant need to demonstrate superiority. But this exceeded all limits. "Stop this," she ordered. Before Robert could move, Brendan was already inside his Ferrari, revving the engine. The sound was deafening, a mechanical roar that vibrated the air. Marcus, in contrast, had started his Hispano-Suiza with a gentle turn of the key. The engine responded with a low murmur, almost a purr. There was no ostentation in that sound, only the dignity of classic engineering. The 2 cars lined up at the improvised starting line. Robert, visibly sweating, raised a white folder that would serve as the starting flag. Silence fell over the crowd. Phones were recording from every angle. This would go viral within hours. Robert lowered the folder. The Ferrari shot off like a yellow projectile, its tires squealing against the asphalt, leaving black marks on the ground. Brendan accelerated fiercely, feeling the engine's power push him against the back of the seat. The speedometer climbed from 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds. Behind it, the Hispano-Suiza moved forward with a measured elegance. Marcus did not slam the accelerator. He simply let the car find its natural rhythm. The vintage engine responded with the loyalty of an old friend. The crowd erupted in shouts and applause as the Ferrari disappeared past the first curve, leaving the Hispano-Suiza at a distance that seemed insurmountable. "That's how it's done, boss," someone yelled. "Poor old guy," another commented with a laugh. Eve Thornton watched in silence, arms crossed in an inscrutable expression. Something about Marcus's tranquility had intrigued her. It was not the resignation of someone defeated, but the serenity of someone who knows something that others ignore. Brendan took the first curve, drifting slightly, enjoying the absolute control, the feeling of dominance. Through the rearview mirror, he saw that the Hispano-Suiza had barely reached the first straight away. He smiled with satisfaction. This will be over in seconds, he thought. But then, halfway through the second straight, the Ferrari's dashboard began to light up with warning lights. First one, then two, then a complete cascade of red and yellow alerts. The engine sputtered. "What?" Brendan looked at the dashboard in disbelief. The engine temperature was rising rapidly. The power was decreasing. The car that moments before had been a roaring beast now behaved like a wounded animal. "No, no, no," Brendan muttered, hitting the steering wheel. He tried to accelerate, but the car only responded with a worrying sound, almost a mechanical groan. The warning lights flashed faster and faster. 200 yards from the finish line, the Ferrari came to a complete stop. The engine died with a final pathetic gasp. Brendan remained motionless in the driver's seat, his hands still clutching the steering wheel, unable to process what had just happened. His reflection in the rearview mirror showed him the image of a defeated man. Behind him, the gentle murmur of the Hispano-Suiza was approaching. Marcus drove with the same calm with which he had started, taking the curves with precision, respecting the temperament of the classic car. There was no rush, no anxiety, just the drive. When he reached where the Ferrari was stopped, Marcus slowed down and pulled up alongside it. He manually rolled down the Hispano-Suiza's window, the mechanism turning smoothly. "Do you need help, Mr. Miller?" he asked with genuine concern in his voice. Brendan did not answer. His pride was so wounded that words failed him. "I can't leave you here," Marcus continued. "Get in, I'll take you to the finish line." It was an impossible offer to refuse. The crowd was waiting ahead. The phones were still recording. There was no way to escape the humiliation, but at least he could reach the finish line. With stiff movements, Brendan got out of his Ferrari and, without looking at Marcus, sat down in the passenger seat of the Hispano-Suiza. The contrast couldn't have been greater. The arrogant CEO, defeated and silent, being transported by the humble janitor in the car he had scorned minutes earlier. Marcus drove the last 200 yards with the same serenity. When he crossed the finish line, the crowd erupted in a confused mixture of applause, nervous laughter, and incredulous comments. The Hispano-Suiza stopped smoothly. Marcus turned off the engine and turned to Brendan. "We have arrived, sir." Brendan got out of the Hispano-Suiza before Marcus could say another word. His face had gone from furious red to pale white. He walked through the crowd, which parted to let him pass, as if his shame were contagious. The phones were still recording. Comments flew from mouth to mouth. "Did you see that? The Ferrari just died." The old man brought him back like a child. Brendan tried to regain some composure. He turned to the crowd with a forced smile that looked more like a grimace. "Obviously there was a technical problem," he said loudly, although his voice trembled slightly. "The race doesn't count. It was a mechanical failure, not a fair competition." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some nodded, wanting to believe that their CEO hadn't just been humiliated. Others exchanged skeptical glances. Eve Thornton stepped forward, her presence gradually silencing the conversations. "Mr. Miller," her voice was firm but controlled, "you proposed this race publicly. You set the conditions, and you bet the company." "It was a joke, Eve." Brendan, responded with barely contained desperation. No one expected that it would actually— A joke, Eve interrupted him. There are over 50 people recording. This is already on social media. Investors will see it within minutes. Brendan clenched his fists. He knew Eve was right. He could already imagine the headlines, the memes, the viral humiliation. "I'm not going to hand over my company for a stupid game," he said through clenched teeth. "It's not your company," Eve replied coldly. "It's our company. The boards, the shareholders, every person who works here's, and you just put all of that at risk for your ego." The silence that followed was absolute. No one dared to move. Then a quiet voice broke the tension. "I don't want the company." Everyone turned toward Marcus, who had gotten out of his Hispano Suiza and was now standing beside it, cap in hand. "I didn't accept this race to win a company," Marcus continued, looking directly at Brendan. "I accepted because you challenged. To me, and a man must respond when he is challenged, but I have no interest in your position, Mr. Miller." Brendan looked at him with a mixture of relief and confusion. "I just want to keep doing my job," Marcus said, "and perhaps, with due respect, suggest that we all remember that a car, no matter how expensive, is just a machine, and machines fail. What should not fail is our treatment of others." The words fell upon the crowd like soft rain. Several employees lowered their gaze, ashamed of having laughed, of having recorded, of having participated in the spectacle. Eve Thornton watched Marcus with new appreciation. In that moment, she made a decision. "The board meeting will be in 2 hours," she announced. "Everyone can return to their posts. The show is over." The crowd began to disperse slowly, with whispered conversations and furtive glances toward Brendan, who remained motionless, caught between the relief of not losing the company and the humiliation of having been saved by the generosity of the man he had tried to humiliate. Marcus returned to his Hispano Suiza, parked it carefully in a space further away, and went back to his work as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened, and nothing would ever be the same. The Solaris Tech board meeting began promptly at 11 o'clock in the morning. The room was all glass and steel, with a long, dark wood table surrounded by ergonomic chairs. Through the windows, San Diego was visible, bathed in the Californian light, oblivious to the drama unfolding in that room. Eve Thornton presided over the table. To her right, Brendan Miller tried to maintain an expression of professional confidence, although his restless hands betrayed his nervousness. The other 6 board members watched with varied expressions, some with curiosity, others with evident concern. "Let's begin," Eve said, adjusting her glasses. "I assume you have all seen the videos circulating since this morning." No one replied. It was unnecessary. The videos already had thousands of views. Some local media outlets had begun covering it as a curious story. "Tech CEO loses race to janitor in classic car," read the headlines. "Brendan," Eve continued, "do you have anything to say before we proceed?" Brendan cleared his throat, straightening in his chair. "It was a misunderstanding," he began in a controlled voice. "A situation that got out of hand. I admit I shouldn't have made that proposal, but I was upset about the badly parked car and you decided to bet the company," interrupted Thomas Clark, the chief financial officer, a 60-year-old man with bushy eyebrows and a penetrating gaze. "Do you know how much damage this can do to our valuation? Investors do not trust impulsive CEOs." "It was a moment of heat," Brendan admitted, "but the janitor's car was in my spot. It was a lack of respect." "It was the only spot available when he arrived," pointed out Carla Jones, the director of human resources, a 40-year-old woman with her hair pulled back in a severe bun. "I have reviewed the security footage. He arrived at 6 in the morning. At that hour, the parking lot was empty." Brendan clenched his jaw but did not respond. Eve tapped her fingers on the table. Thoughtful. "There is something else that worries me," she said. "The behavior toward an employee. Marcus Sterling has been working here for 15 years. He has never had a complaint. And this morning, he was treated with public contempt." "He's a janitor," Brendan muttered, unable to restrain himself. The silence that followed was glacial. "He is an employee," Eve corrected him sharply. "Like you, like me, like everyone in this company." Brendan realized his mistake too late. "I propose a temporary suspension while we investigate the incident," Thomas said. "We need to control the damage with investors and the press." "I second the motion," Carla added immediately. Eve looked at Brendan. For a moment, she almost felt sorry for him, Almost. The vote will be tomorrow, she announced. In the meantime, Brendan, I suggest you use this time to reflect on what kind of leader you want to be. The meeting ended in a tense atmosphere. Brendan left the room feeling the ground moving beneath his feet. Meanwhile, 3 floors below, Marcus was cleaning the lobby windows with precise circular movements. His reflection in the glass showed the same serene expression as always. Several employees walked past him, and for the first time in 15 years, some stopped to greet him. "Good morning, Marcus. Great job this morning. That car of yours is impressive." Marcus responded to each greeting with a courteous nod, seeking no prominence, feeding no drama. But the seeds of change had already been planted. At lunchtime, the Solaris Tech cafeteria buzzed with conversations about what had happened. Marcus ate his sandwich in his usual spot, a small table by the window, away from the central bustle. Normally, he ate alone. Employees tended to group by department, by hierarchy, by affinity. Marcus did not belong to any of those circles, but today was different. First, Sofia Rodriguez, a 25-year-old engineer who worked in the solar panel design department, approached. She carried her tray with uncertainty, like someone daring to do something unusual. "May I sit down?" she asked. Marcus looked up, surprised, but nodded kindly. "Of course, miss." Sophia sat down, fidgeting with her fork before speaking. "I wanted to tell you that what you did this morning was brave." Marcus smiled gently. "It wasn't bravery. I just accepted a challenge I shouldn't have accepted. But once I said yes, I couldn't back down. Most people would have refused," Sophia insisted, "or apologized, but you just did it." They fell silent for a moment, eating. Then Sophia asked, "How do you keep that car so immaculate? It must be almost 100 years old." Marcus's eyes lit up slightly, as always when he spoke of his Hispano Suiza. 93 years old, to be exact. "It belonged to my grandfather. He left it to me when he passed away 30 years ago. He taught me that what is valuable doesn't need to be new. It just needs to be cared for." "Was your grandfather a mechanic?" "He was an engineer," Marcus replied with discreet pride. "He worked at the Hispano Suiza factory in Barcelona before it closed. He was a master. He used to say that modern cars have power, but classics have soul." Soon, others joined the table. First Javier from the logistics department, then Martha and Paul from the marketing team. Within 20 minutes, Marcus's table was surrounded by people who wanted to hear stories of the Hispano Suiza, who asked about classic mechanics, who simply wanted to be near someone who had demonstrated dignity when everyone expected submission. From a table across the cafeteria, Brendan watched the scene with growing bitterness. He was sitting alone, his tray untouched in front of him. The employees who normally competed to sit near the CEO now avoided him, as if failure were contagious. Robert, his assistant, approached nervously. "Mr. Miller, the communications people want to talk to you about a statement for the press." "Tell them I'm busy," Brendan cut in sharply. Robert nodded and quickly withdrew. Brendan stared intently at Marcus, who was laughing softly at something Sophia had just said. It was not a loud, presumptuous laugh, just the genuine warmth of someone enjoying a conversation. How can he be so calm, Brendan thought. I just publicly humiliated him, called his car trash, and there he is as if nothing happened. He didn't understand that precisely that tranquility, that ability not to feed the drama, was what made Marcus respectable. Eve Thornton was not a woman to make impulsive decisions. While the board deliberated over Brendan's suspension, she decided to investigate for herself who Marcus Sterling really was. In 15 years, she had never had a real conversation with him. She had seen him in the hallways, always working quietly, always courteous, but she had never stopped to ask him anything personal. That afternoon, after reviewing his employee file, which was concise, hire date, absence of complaints, perfect punctuality, Eve decided to speak with Carla Jones, the Director of Human Resources. "What do you know about Marcus?" Eve asked in Carla's office. Carla looked up from her computer, surprised by the question. "The janitor. Not much. He's the most reliable employee we have, never misses work, never late. 3 years ago he declined a pay raise because he said he already earned enough to live with dignity." Eve raised an eyebrow. "He declined a raise? He said there were younger people who needed it more than he did. He suggested the money be used to improve the break room for the cleaning staff." Carla smiled at the memory. It was the first time someone had ever turned down more money. Anything else? Carla reflected for a moment. I know he's married. His wife is named Clara, like me. Sometimes he brings in cookies she bakes and leaves them in the cleaning staff break room. He never seeks recognition for it. Eve nodded, processing the information. And his family. Children. A son, I think, but he never talks much about his personal life. He's reserved but not closed off. Just discreet. That night, Eve couldn't stop thinking about Marcus. There was something about his behavior that deeply intrigued her. It wasn't just the calm in the face of humiliation, it was the total absence of resentment. The next day she decided to do something unusual. She went down to the basement where the maintenance room was. Marcus was organizing tools on a metal panel, each in its precise place. Hearing footsteps, he turned and, seeing Eve, straightened up immediately. "Miss Thornton," he said respectfully, "do you need something?" "I wanted to talk to you, Marcus. Do you have a moment?" "Of course." They sat down on 2 folding chairs. The room smelled of pine cleaner and metal. "How are you after yesterday's incident?" Eve asked directly. Marcus smiled gently. "Fine, thank you. It was an unusual day, but nothing that cannot be overcome. You were very generous not to accept the bet." "It wasn't generosity," Marcus replied. "It was common sense. I don't know how to run a company. I know how to clean, fix things, take care of a building. Each person has their place, their purpose." "But Brendan treated you poorly." Marcus shrugged. He was frustrated. People say things they don't mean when they're frustrated. "I don't take it personally." Eve studied him carefully. There was no falsehood in his words, no hidden bitterness. "Your car is extraordinary," Eve commented, changing the subject. "How did it come into your hands?" Marcus's eyes lit up. "It belonged to my grandfather, Sebastian Sterling. He worked his whole life as an engineer at Hispano Suiza. When the factory closed in the 30s, they allowed him to buy one of the last models at a reduced price. It was his pride. And he passed it down to you. He taught me how to take care of it since I was a child. Every part, every system. He used to say that a classic car is like a relationship. It requires constant attention, but if you care for it, it lasts forever." Eve smiled at the analogy. "Does your son also appreciate classic cars?" Marcus's expression softened even more, becoming almost nostalgic. "My son Andrew, he has his own path. He's a doctor in Boston. He's proud of the Hispano Suiza, but his passion is healing people, not machines." He paused. "And I'm proud of him." They talked for 20 more minutes. Eve discovered that Marcus had studied mechanical engineering in his youth, but never completed the degree because he had to work to support his family when his father fell ill. He had worked in workshops, factories, until he found stability as a janitor at Solaris. "Tech. Did you never regret not finishing your degree?" Eve asked. "Regret is a luxury I cannot afford," Marcus replied with quiet wisdom. "I made the decisions I had to make, and they gave me a good life, a wife I love, a successful son, honest work. What more could I ask for?" When Eve left the maintenance room, she carried a clear decision with her. The board vote took place 2 days after the incident. The 7 members met again in the glass room, this time without Brendan present. Eve presented the facts. The public behavior, the reputational risk, the complaints that had begun to arrive from employees about other incidents of dismissive treatment by Brendan. "It's not just what happened with Marcus," Carla Jones explained. "Since we began the investigation, 3 more employees have reported similar situations. Dismissive comments, condescending treatment." Thomas Clark added financial data. 2 major investors have expressed concern. One has threatened to withdraw funds if we don't handle this appropriately. The vote was quick. 6 votes in favor of a 3-month suspension without pay, during which a complete leadership assessment would be conducted. Only 1 voted against. When Brendan was called in to be informed, his face went from shock to controlled anger. "This is an exaggeration," he protested, "for a small mistake." "It is not a small mistake," Eve interrupted him. "It is a pattern. And more importantly, it is a lack of fundamental values that this company must represent." Brendan left the room with a clenched jaw. As he collected his things from his office, he could feel the eyes of the employees. Some with barely concealed satisfaction, others with discomfort. When he passed the maintenance room, he saw Marcus repairing a lock. The janitor looked up and, to Brendan's surprise, nodded respectfully. There was no triumph in that gesture. There was no mockery, only the silent acknowledgement of one man toward another. Brendan did not return the greeting. With Brendan suspended, the company operated under a temporary shared direction by the board. The atmosphere had subtly changed. There was more conversation, less tension, and there was more curiosity about Marcus. One afternoon, during coffee, Sofia Rodriguez was talking with colleagues from the engineering department when she mentioned that Marcus had studied mechanical engineering. "The janitor?" asked David, a 50-year-old senior engineer. "Are you sure?" "He told me." "Himself?" David frowned, thoughtful. Marcus Sterling." He pulled out his mobile and started searching for something. "Wait, there's something that—" His fingers flew over the screen. Then his eyes widened. "It can't be," he murmured. "What did you find?" Sophia asked, leaning in. David turned the mobile to show them an old article from a 1978 automotive engineering magazine. The headline read, "Young Mechanic Restores Historic Hispano-Suiza Using Traditional Techniques." And in the photo, 47 years younger but unmistakable, was Marcus next to his car. "It's him," Sophia whispered. David continued reading aloud. "Marcus Sterling, 25 years old, has completed the restoration of a 1932 Hispano-Suiza that belonged to his grandfather, an engineer at the legendary Barcelona factory. Sterling spent 5 years and learned nearly forgotten techniques to return the vehicle to its original glory." 5 years, Sophia repeated in amazement. "He restored that car for 5 years. The news spread through the company. Several employees searched for the article, shared the old photo. They began to see Marcus with different eyes. He was not just a janitor. He was an artisan, a guardian of history, someone who had dedicated years of his life to preserving something beautiful. When Marcus learned that the article was circulating, he simply smiled shyly. "It was a long time ago," he said, when Sophia asked him. "I was young and had more energy. But you did." "It," she insisted. "That's incredible." "What's incredible," Marcus replied gently, "is that this car is still running 93 years after it was built. I just did my part to keep it alive." A week after the incident, Eve Thornton summoned Marcus to her office. When he arrived, he found not only Eve but also Carla Jones and Thomas Clark. "Please, sit down," Eve invited, pointing to a chair across from her desk. Marcus sat down with a certain apprehension. 3 board members didn't call him in to talk about the cleaning schedule. "Marcus," Eve began, "we have been reflecting on what happened, and on you. I don't want to cause trouble, Miss Thornton." "You haven't caused trouble, quite the opposite." Eve leaned forward. "You have shown something that is rare in the corporate world, genuine integrity. And that made us think." Thomas continued, "We are implementing a new organizational culture program. We want Solaris Tech to be a place where all employees are respected, where hierarchy does not mean contempt." "That sounds very good," Marcus said, still not understanding. "We want you to help us," Carla declared, "as a culture and values consultant." Marcus blinked, confused. "Consultant? But I don't have human resources studies." "You have something better," Eve replied. "You have lived experience. You have worked at all levels, workshops, factories, maintenance. You know how a company really works from the bottom up, and you have shown that you can maintain your dignity no matter how you are treated." "I wouldn't know what to do," Marcus admitted honestly. "Simply be yourself," Carla said. "Talk to employees, listen to their concerns, remind us when we are losing sight of what's important." Marcus fell silent, processing the offer. "You would still be a janitor," Eve clarified, "but a few hours a week would be dedicated to this new role, with an appropriate salary increase, of course." "I don't need more money," Marcus replied automatically. "But if I can help people treat each other better, then I accept." The 3 board members smiled. "There is one more condition," Eve added with a twinkle in her eye. "We want you to bring your Hispano-Suiza to company events, to tell its story. It represents something we want Solaris Tech to represent. Excellence that endures." Marcus felt his eyes well up slightly. For the first time in 15 years, someone saw value in him beyond his job as a janitor. "It will be an honor," he said in a soft voice. 3 months later, Brendan Miller returned to Solaris Tech. His suspension had ended, but he was not returning as CEO. The board had reassigned him as Director of Operations, an important position, but without the absolute authority he previously held. His office was no longer the corner with panoramic views. He now worked in a smaller space, sharing a floor with other directors. His first day back was humbling. Employees greeted him with cold courtesy, professional but distant. No one competed for his attention. No one laughed at his jokes. During lunch he sat alone. From his table he could see Marcus in his usual spot by the window, surrounded by employees who listened attentively as he explained something about the cooling systems of classic engines. The scene was almost unbearable for Brendan. The man he had scorned was now more respected than him. In the following weeks, Brendan tried to regain his position. He worked more hours, presented elaborate proposals, sought to excel in every meeting. But something had fundamentally changed. He could no longer lead with arrogance. Every time he tried to assert his authority, he remembered the Hispano-Suiza crossing the finish line with him as a passenger. One afternoon, while reviewing reports in his office, he heard a knock at the door. "Come in." Marcus entered, carrying a toolbox. "Excuse me, Mr. Miller. I was reported that your window isn't closing properly. I've come to repair it." Brendan stared at him. It was the first time they had been alone since the incident. "Go ahead," he said in a neutral voice. Marcus worked in silence for several minutes, adjusting the window mechanism. Brendan tried to concentrate on his computer, but the janitor's presence was a constant distraction. Finally, he couldn't restrain himself. "Why didn't you take the company?" The question came out more abruptly than he intended. Marcus paused, turning toward him. "I already told you, sir. It wasn't mine to take. But I bet it. You won." "Fairly. I won by luck," Marcus corrected. "Your car had a mechanical failure. That's not a real victory." Brendan let out a bitter laugh. "You are too noble, Marcus. Most people would have taken the opportunity." "Most people," Marcus replied gently, "are not necessarily an example of how we should act." They looked at each other for a long moment. In Brendan's eyes, there was something that hadn't been there before. Genuine respect, mixed with envy and shame. "I've thought a lot about that." "A day," Brendan admitted. "About how I treated you. It was unforgivable." Marcus finished adjusting the window and closed his toolbox. "It is already forgiven, Mr. Miller. Grudges only weigh down the one who carries them." "Just like that?" "Just like that." When Marcus left the office, Brendan stayed looking at the newly repaired window. For the first time in months, he felt something akin to peace. The following months subtly transformed Solaris Tech. The organizational culture program that Marcus was helping to implement began to bear fruit. They were not dramatic changes, but small adjustments that cumulatively created a difference. Directors who learned the names of the cleaning staff, engineers who helped logistics personnel load boxes, meetings where all voices were heard regardless of rank. Marcus did not give sermons or formal lectures. He was simply present, observed, and occasionally asked simple questions that prompted reflection. Why is that deadline important? How? Will this affect the people working in that department? Is there a kinder way to communicate that? His influence was like water, soft but persistent, gradually shaping the corporate culture. One afternoon, during a board meeting where they were discussing firing an employee for low performance, Marcus was present as an observer. "It's simple economics," one of the directors argued. "He's not meeting targets. We have to cut him before it affects the team." "Has anyone asked why he's not meeting them?" Marcus intervened discreetly. The room turned toward him. "What do you mean?" Eve asked. "Just that sometimes people underperform because something is wrong in their lives. A conversation before a drastic decision could reveal important things." They followed Marcus's advice. It turned out the employee was caring for his sick mother and wasn't sleeping well. They adjusted his schedule and offered support. 3 months later, he was one of the best in his area. These stories multiplied, and each one reinforced a simple truth. Treating people with dignity was not just morally right, it was also effective. Brendan observed these changes with mixed feelings. On one hand, he saw the company improving. On the other, every improvement reminded him of his own failure. But slowly he began to change too. He started arriving earlier, not to impress, but to help prepare the rooms before important meetings. He began to ask his subordinates how they were, genuinely interested in the answers. He started listening more and talking less. It was not an instant or complete transformation. Brendan still had moments of arrogance, of impatience, But every time he felt the urge to be dismissive or humiliating, he remembered the Hispano-Suiza advancing calmly while his Ferrari died on the track. Solaris Tech celebrated its 20th anniversary with an event in the company garden. There were white tents, elegant catering, and an exhibition of the company's milestones. Eve had a special idea, an exhibit of Solaris stories, where employees from all levels shared their experiences. Marcus had been invited to participate with his Hispano-Suiza. The car was parked in a prominent spot, surrounded by velvet ropes. Beside it, a sign briefly told its story. The engineer grandfather, the 5 years of restoration, the 93 years of the vehicle's existence. Guests, employees, investors, local press, clustered around, admiring every detail of the car. Marcus stood by the Hispano-Suiza, wearing his best suit, simple but impeccable, answering questions with his usual patience. "What is the secret to keeping it like this?" a journalist asked. "Consistency," Marcus replied. "It's not about grand occasional gestures, but about small, consistent care, like any valuable relationship." "And the famous race?" another asked with a knowing smile. "Did you always know you would win?" Marcus shook his head. "It's never about winning or losing. It's about responding with dignity when we are challenged. The result is secondary." Eve stepped up to the small stage set up for the speeches. The microphone picked up her clear voice. 20 years ago, we started Solaris Tech with a dream: sustainable technological innovation. We have achieved a lot, but this year we learned something more important than any technical advance." The crowd fell silent. "We learned that a company is not just its products or its profits. It is its people, and that treating every person with respect is not optional courtesy. It is the foundation of everything else." She looked toward where Marcus stood. "Someone taught us that not with words, but with example, and in his honor, we have established the Marcus Sterling Award, which will be presented annually to the employee who best exemplifies integrity, humility, and excellence in their work." Applause erupted. Marcus, surprised and clearly uncomfortable with the attention, waved his hand modestly. Brendan was among the crowd. He had come to the event with apprehension, unsure of how he would be received. But as he listened to Eve's speech and saw Marcus surrounded by genuine respect, he felt something he hadn't felt in months. Not envy, but admiration. After the speeches, he approached Marcus. "Congratulations," he said sincerely. Marcus looked at him with surprise. "Thank you, Mr. Miller. Call me Brendan. I think it's time." They shook hands. It was not friendship, perhaps it never would be, but it was mutual. Respect, and that was enough. The following years brought more subtle changes. Brendan started visiting Marcus on Saturdays, learning not only about classic mechanics, but also about the philosophy behind it. Respect for craftsmanship, patience with processes, the satisfaction of a job well done. One morning, while cleaning carburetors, Brendan commented, "My Ferrari is for sale." Marcus looked up, surprised. "Why?" "Because I realized I drove that car to impress others, not because it made me happy." Brendan smiled ironically. "I'm thinking of buying something more, with substance." "Cars don't define who we are," Marcus observed, "but they do reflect how we want to live." At Solaris Tech, the transformation was now evident. Staff turnover had decreased dramatically. Satisfaction surveys showed record numbers, and more importantly, there was an atmosphere of genuine respect that permeated all levels. Eve Thornton, at the annual investors meeting, presented not only impressive financial figures but also organizational culture data. "We discovered that when people feel respected, they work better, they innovate better, they collaborate better. It's not magic, it's basic humanity, and we learned it from our janitor." The investors, initially skeptical, could not argue with the results. Solaris Tech was not only more profitable, it was more stable, more innovative, more attractive to young talent. One autumn afternoon, as the leaves began to turn golden in San Diego, Marcus received an unexpected visit at work. His son Andrew had come from Boston with his wife and their 2 young children. "I wanted the kids to meet their grandpa at his work," Andrew explained, "and to see the famous Hispano-Suiza that's now in news articles." Marcus knelt down to hug his grandchildren, eyes wet with emotion. "Is it true you won a race, Grandpa?" asked the elder, 7 years old. "It's true I finished a race," Marcus corrected. But the real victory was what came after. He showed his family the building, introducing them to the employees who now greeted him by name. Sophia gave him an affectionate hug. Eve personally came down to greet the family. Even Brendan appeared, shaking Andrew's hand with genuine respect. "Your father is an exceptional man," Brendan told him. "He saved me from myself." As the family prepared to leave, Marcus took his grandchildren to the Hispano Suiza, parked in its usual spot. "This car," he explained, "is 93 years old. It has survived wars, crises, changes of all kinds. Do you know why?" "Why, Grandpa?" "Because someone always cared for it. My grandfather, then me, and someday you, if you want. Valuable things last, not because they are perfect, but because someone decides they are worth the effort." The children reverently touched the shiny hood, feeling the history under their small hands. That night, Marcus drove home with his wife Clara beside him, as he had done for 46 years of marriage. The Hispano Suiza purred softly under the starry San Diego sky. "It was a good day," Clara commented, taking his hand. "Every day is a good day," Marcus replied, "when you live with purpose." Years later, when corporate historians would study the transformation of Solaris Tech from a promising company to a global leader in sustainable technology, they would point to many factors: strategic investments, technical innovations, market expansion. But the employees who lived through that period knew the truth. Everything changed the day a 72-year-old janitor accepted an impossible race and, upon winning it, chose generosity over revenge, dignity over triumph, character over power. Because in the end, Ferraris break down, titles are forgotten, fortunes vanish. But the way we treat others, the integrity with which we live, the wisdom we share, that remains. That is what truly reaches the finish line first. And that, like Marcus Sterling's Hispano Suiza, endures through time, polished not by ostentation, but by the constant care of hands that understand that what is truly valuable deserves to be preserved. In the Solaris Tech parking lot, the space next to the entrance no longer has a name engraved in gold letters. It now has a simple plaque that reads, "Reserved for whoever arrives first." Because that, after all, is the most important lesson. In the race of life, arriving first does not mean being the fastest, the most powerful, or the most ostentatious. It means being consistent, being worthy, and remembering that true success is measured not in victories over others, but in peace with oneself.